morning, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, How to Deliver a Compelling Message. My aim today is to give you 5 tips to make sure that the message is elevated and has impact with your audience. The reverse of that is having a message that has no impact, that doesn't influence people, and then that becomes a waste of time, and it's also known as hot air. So how do we make sure when we're crafting a message, we're not hot air, we're not irrelevant content for our audience? So Peter Dew's my name, public speaking trainer and coach. And if I can help you in any way, do let me know. Just share my screen. So some tips for, so just do that share again. So some tips to help you ensure your message is compelling, has impact, is influential, moves people from where they are to where you need them to be or where they need to be. So this is about having messages that are more influential and more impactful. Those of you who've done webinars before, you know to ask questions as we go, participate, any comments, type in the chat box. I'll keep an eye on the chat box down here. Take notes. And of course, this webinar is being recorded. So if there's any content you find exceptionally valuable that you wish to review, let us know and we can provide you the recording. And most importantly, think about your own circumstances. Have you got something coming up and you need to change the message to be more impactful, to have more impact? Or is there something you've done in the past and when you think about it, you realize you could have had more clarity in your message, you could have had more impact? So the first tip to create a compelling message, start with a strong and relevant opening. Start with something that grabs attention and lets your audience know that they're in the right room. They're in the right presentation for their problems, their issues, their concerns, whether it's growing their superannuation balance, whether it's cybersecurity, whether it's health and well-being, whatever your message is, that opening few minutes should let the audience know, wow, I need to listen. The metaphor I use is when we're reading a newspaper. Many people don't read newspapers now, but I get online journals. I get the New York Times, and there's about 20 articles. I also read the newspaper. As I'm scanning the newspaper, as I'm going through the New York Times, I'm choosing which articles to read and which articles to skip over. They don't interest me. And I do that by looking at the headline. So your opening 30 seconds is the headline that determines whether people want to pay attention and read the article or whether they're going to not pay attention, gloss over to the next article, which could be dreaming about a problem they have at work, what they're going to do on the weekend. Maybe they've got to prepare dinner. So their mind's going to drift because you haven't got their attention up front. There's a psychological term for this, behavioral psychology. It's called the rule of primacy. The first words matter. Primary words, the first words that come out, primacy, apparently stick in people's heads. So start strong. What can you do? You can start with an amazing statistic, something that people think, wow, that's really amazing. start with a quote. I often use a quotation from Winston Churchill or Mark Twain. I often use James Earl Jones. James Earl Jones said there's nothing worse than having messages in your heart that you're unable to speak because of fear. And I use that quote in my Overcoming Your Fear of Public Speaking workshop. There's nothing worse than having messages in your heart that you're unable to speak, unable to utter, were James Earl Jones's words, through fear. And everyone in the room is there because they have a fear of public speaking. What can you say to create relevance, set the scene, and let your audience know, okay, I'm in the right room for my problem, for my issue. This message is for me, as opposed to them zoning out, going to sleep and thinking, I wonder what I'm going to do for dinner tonight. Powerful statistic, a challenge, something controversial. Al Gore started with an inconvenient truth, and his opening statement is around climate change is happening now. What are you going to say that grabs impact straight away? That'll help you create a compelling message. The second tip is the stories. Use compelling stories, examples and case studies that really illustrate the point or the message you're trying to make. Maybe you're talking about financial planning and superannuation balance for men is significantly higher than women. And this gap, life expectancy of Australian white males versus Aboriginal males is a big difference. And you might be using stories and case studies that illustrate how you're able to bridge the gap. How by an intervention or using your strategy or your knowledge, we can bridge the gap. It may be about overcoming adversity. So I am a person who stutters. Many of you will know that. And in me sharing my story of overcoming fear, overcoming a stutter, that is aligned with my message that anyone can become an effective and confident public speaker. And what you've got to say matters. So as James Earl Jones says, never let fear be the reason you don't share your messages. So the story must carry the message. I sometimes, and it must be to the point and concise, I sometimes hear people give too much detail with the story. It's quite an interesting story, but it's so what? So what? Get to the so what fairly quickly. And then every time as you embellish the story or you tell a little bit more details, bring it back to the core message, the compelling message. And this retouching on your core message throughout the story or using different stories to illustrate the same message, you create that compelling message. One of my messages, fear of public speaking will never go away. Fear is a normal part of performance. Fear is a normal part of getting on stage, and many people have performance anxiety, stage fright. And the stories I use are Sally Pearson, 2012 Olympic gold medalist, was interviewed before the gold medal race. Are you nervous? Are you anxious? She said, of course I'm nervous. If I wasn't nervous, I would not be ready to race. If you're not nervous, you're probably not ready to speak. Then I use Ringo Starr, one of the Beatles, the drummer. Ringo Starr's nickname is Pukey in the Sky. He goes and vomits before every presentation, stage fright, performance anxiety. But that doesn't make him a bad drummer. He's not off beat. He's not out of key. So if Sally Pearson can be nervous before a race, if Ringo Starr can be nervous before a performance, if Peter Dew can be nervous before every presentation, and the tie I have on today is because at 11 o'clock, I'm presenting at a conference. So I'm dressed and ready to go. And I am a little bit nervous. I am always nervous before a conference presentation. So 3 stories that illustrate the same point. Nerves are a normal part of performance. Nerves are a normal part of public speaking. What stories and case studies and examples can you use to illustrate your point? Grab them from everywhere, your examples, your experience, and give them a name. And I call this your bank of stories. So as you go through life with your messages around health and well-being, around financial planning, around time management, collect those stories, give them a name, and add them to your bank of stories. And that way, whenever you're presenting, when I'm presenting at 11 o'clock today, I'll just call upon those stories to illustrate my point. What stories do you have that really highlight the compelling message you're trying to have? The more effective, the more appropriate the stories, the more compelling will your message be. In your compelling message, make sure there's some emotional appeal for the audience. One of the mistakes that people speak, and they have powerful messages and they're really important to the speaker, but the audience out there thinks, so what? And we call this what's in it for them, or what's in it for me. So when I go to a seminar and I'm listening, I've got a seminar tonight at 6:30, Professional Speakers Australia, and I'm going to be looking and scanning and thinking, what's in it for me? How am I going to use this information to grow my business, to build better marketing, to build a greater client base? What's in it for me? If there's nothing in it for me, I will zone out and I will not get whatever the message was. So think of your audience as being a little bit selfish. In fact, I might suggest that you on the webinar are selfish. You're here today out of self-interest. You want to take some knowledge, you want to take some information, you want to go out there and be more confident and more effective in crafting your messages in your public speaking. That is self-interest. That is you being selfish. There's nothing wrong with being selfish. That's why we invest time. That's why I invest money in professional development for us to learn and grow. You're not there as my cheer squad. You're not there to pat me on the back and say, good job, Peter. You're there to learn. So please, if you want to create a compelling message, make it about the audience and for the audience. One of the things I say to work out how you're going to connect and have that emotional appeal is walk 30 moons in your enemy's moccasins. This is a native North American Indian saying. Walk 30 moons in your enemy's moccasins before they go to war. So they have those powwows, they have those chats, and after 30 moons, a month of discussions, negotiation, they cannot reconcile their differences, then they go to war. So put yourself in your audience's shoes. Walk 1,000 steps in your audience's shoes. What do they want from you? What's keeping them awake at night? How does your message help them move forward? And when you do that, you'll connect at an emotional level and your message will be more compelling. So why do they care about my message? What's in it for them? I use a little thing called the IU ratio. And I often ask people, so what do you do? And what I hear is, well, I am an accountant. I've been doing this for 15 years and I help clients do their tax return. I'm very good. I'm also a certified practicing accountant. So that one is very much about the speaker. So let me demonstrate for you. So what do? I'm a public speaking trainer coach. I've been doing this for 15 years. I have an MBA. I'm also a certified professional speaker, and I'm a certified executive coach through the Australian Institute of Management. If I can help you in any way, let me know. Let me state that again. You know how most people hate public speaking. I can help you find your voice so you can confidently, effectively have impact with your clients, with your team, with your mob, because what you've got to say matters. That one's about you. I call it the I-you ratio. So if you want to have a compelling message, make it about the audience. I reckon about 20% about myself and 80% about you, the audience. What are you going to do to make sure that your message connects at an emotional level with the audience? There is a saying, people don't remember what you've said, they remember how you make them feel. So if you've got a 9-step process, 3 pillars to success, 5 strategies to become financially secure, they're not going to remember that. They're going to remember the story of the person who was struggling, waited too long, intervened, followed your plan, and now looks like they're going to retire comfortably with sufficient superannuation. They're going to remember the story. People don't remember much of my public speaking workshops, but they remember my journey from elective mute, being unable to speak, to now doing public speaking for my living. And they then feel, oh, I can do this. If Peter can do this, I can do this. What's your emotional connection with your audience that helps them see light at the end of the tunnel, a way forward, how to achieve their goals? To have a compelling message, make sure you anticipate pushback and objections, especially when your message is controversial or you're asking people to change, to follow you. There's a new way of doing things, new policies, new procedures. We see this in politics all the time. They're changing superannuation, they're changing health, they're changing Medicare. Things are happening and they're selling these ideas. And people are resistant to change. They're often resistant to new ideas. So you need to anticipate, what are those objections? No, that won't work, Peter. No, that's a silly idea. And incorporate that into your message so that you've anticipated those objections. This is going to cost us a lot of money. This means more taxes. And of course, we're going to achieve this outcome with no additional taxes, would be a politician's way of weaving in and addressing that concern. Once again, the walking 30 moons in your enemy's moccasins, walking in your audience footsteps, if you were them listening to your message, what questions would you ask? What resistance would you feel? What objections? Work out what they are, and you can weave them into your message, and that helps your message become more compelling, because all the what ifs that I'm asking as an audience, all the what ifs I'm thinking about, you're dealing with them as you go in your compelling message. Compelling message, establish credibility. So you're asking me to do something, you're asking me to adopt a new way of thinking, you're asking me to consider change. Where does as the speaker, where does your credibility come from? Without credibility, people won't follow you and your message will be less compelling. Where does your credibility come from? Like we have a bank of stories, I have a range of credibility things called my credibility stack. And that might be my LinkedIn profile, that might be the ebooks I'm publishing, that might be my qualifications, my MBA, my certified speaking profession, that might be my experience, 15 years in the trade speaking full time, no other source of income, not part-time speaker. My volunteering at the Speakeasy Association for people who stutter, my own story overcoming adversity as a person who stutters, the video I show people in my workshops, all of these things add to your credibility. And if there's pushback and there's resistance, then maybe you need to build or extend your credibility. Maybe you need to go and get a new certificate, a new ticket. Maybe you need to do some more research, or sometimes you need to borrow credibility. I was reading an article in Harvard Business Review the other day, and Harvard Business Review found that which supports what you're saying. That's borrowed credibility. Stanford University really recently did some research on nonverbal communication, and what they found is if the words you're saying, the words coming out of your mouth, and your nonverbal communication, your face, your gestures, your voice are not congruent, then unfortunately the nonverbal overrides, trumps your message. I use that to build credibility when I ask people to really work on their nonverbal communication. So not part of this particular webinar, but I guess a compelling message would require compelling nonverbal communication, compelling appropriate gestures. I haven't put that in this webinar. That's just an aside. So where does your credibility come from that supports you in building that compelling message that you want me to listen to follow, to consider, to maybe even change my behaviour? And finally, end with a strong call to action. The reverse is, thanks very much. That was really, really nice. Have a safe journey. Hope I can work with you later. That's a soft landing. So end with a strong ending. Have a call to action. So if you only do one thing today, when you go back to your workplace, can you review your snake bite first aid? There's been an increase in snake activity. So please, if you only do one thing, go back to your desk, your office, and review, refresh your snake bite first aid. What's your call to action? What are you going to ask people to do? So if you incorporate those things on your screen, a strong opening, compelling stories, the emotional appeal, that emotional connection, and your compelling message anticipates objections and pushback, you come from a position of being credible in what you're asking people to do, and you have a strong call to action, you will have a very influential, compelling message. My upcoming workshops, Karratha, Port Hedland. Port Hedland's mostly full, 23rd of October in Perth, and that'll be the end of my public workshops. Upcoming webinars, for those of you who like to continue learning, how to handle difficult audience members. So you might have a compelling message and you might get to that pushback stage, and one of the people who pushes back is a heckler. That's a load of rubbish, Peter. That won't work. How do you know? Where do you get your evidence from? And all of a sudden, people get really nervous. And I sometimes say the whole stack of cards comes falling down. How do you handle difficult audience members? And this is a virtual presentation. So 6 mistakes to avoid when presenting virtually. I think a webinar is different to a virtual presentation. Last week I was in Mildura. I had 11 people in the room and I had 3 people zooming in from Swan Hill, Robina, Brisbane. So it was a hybrid meeting, but I had to keep attending to the 3 people zooming in as much as I did to the people in the room. Very hard to do for 7 hours straight, but if you avoid these 6 common mistakes, you'll be more effective as a virtual presenter. Checking for comments or questions. No comments or questions. You've got my contact information if you need any further information. This webinar is being recorded. Send us an email if you'd like a copy. And remember, start strong if you want to be more influential. Use stories that reiterate, keep coming back to your compelling message. That emotional appeal, audiences are selfish. What's in it for me? Anticipate and incorporate objections, push back. Where does your credibility come from? And end with a strong call to action. So Peter Dew, wishing you well in your public speaking journey. And please, next time you're preparing a presentation, make sure your message is compelling.